All right, it's 7:44, so jot that down, 7:44. We'd like to keep this to about an hour. We're going to get started in this class with our first lesson in classical history. The schedule is still being worked out, so this week we're going to continue this schedule. Normally we start at 7:30. I'm continuing to work with the schedule to find what's best for us to get everything in. But tonight we're going to finish this week with last week's schedule, which is starting at 7:30. We're a few minutes late, but we're getting started at 7:45. And I'd like to teach the first lesson in classical history. As you can see on the board, there is a ton of information for me to get through. And I want to get through this whole chapter, this whole lesson, in just one class lesson, okay? So we're going to move through this pretty quick. In the text is the Cambridge Ancient History, Volume 3, and the Classical History course starts with Chapter 22. I want you to jot that down, because if you download the text to study, you're going to download the Ancient History book, Volume 3, and this course, Classical History, starts in Chapter 22. So make sure you have that jotted down. The title of the first chapter we're studying in Classical History is The Growth of the Dorian States. The Growth of the Dorian States. This is a very important period of history. It's really important that we understand this period of history to understand Greek history and everything that comes later. And I'm going to do my best to explain it all and take 50 pages of history and try to condense it for you into a single hour of class time. All right? Probably take you a month to read through that chapter, and I'm hoping that we can get through it in just one class. To paint some of the background, our study of the ancient world begins obviously with creation, 3500 BC, the rise of the Sumerian civilization, the beginning of actual recorded history, 3500 BC. We study that in ancient history. And that continues until the end of the heroic age. The end of the heroic age is basically the time after the Trojan War. So you can see here the first point. The heroic age ends around 1100 BC. That's just after the Trojan War. And that's basically where ancient history for us is going to stop and classical history is going to begin. Okay? So think end of the Trojan War. That's the end of the ancient world. And then classical history begins. What marks the real beginning of classical history is an event called the Dorian Invasion. And you need to take notes as we go. If you see it written on the board, when we get to it, write it in your notes. Okay? The event that changes Greece and that will really help us to understand what's going on in Greece for the next 600 years or so is the Dorian Invasion. According to Greek legends and Greek mythology, some of it's poetic, some of it's actually real history. It's hard to know what is history and what is just poetry in Greek mythology. But when Hercules, who is considered a god, but was also considered a man, he was a man who became a god. When Hercules died, his descendants were banished from Greece, and they moved up north. And they stayed up in the north until this time. As the heroic age came to an end, the descendants of Hercules, that's what this word means, Heraclidae. Heraclidae means the sons of Heracles, the sons of Hercules. At that time, the sons of Hercules, the Heraclidae, chose to invade Greece and take back the land that used to be theirs. And this event is called the Dorian Invasion. The Dorian Invasion. And it happened sometime around 1100 BC. All right? It's sort of a 100, 200 year period where this takes place. This isn't like 1 week the Dorians invade. This is a period of history where the Dorians return from the north and come back into the lands of Greece. Okay? This happens at the end of the heroic age. So what happens at this time is that in the lands of Greece, and this is what's really important to understand, two different races are mixed together in the lands of Greece. You have the Dorian people, the sons of Heracles. The Dorians come in to Greece, and then there's all the people who were there before, who we're going to call the pre-Dorians. Okay, so realize that there's two races in Greece. There's the Dorians, and the other race is the pre-Dorians. And that's going to explain a lot of the fighting and a lot of the problems that take place in Greece. There's always this battle between the Greeks who were there and the Dorians who invaded. All right? That's why there's a lot of fighting. That's why the cities are divided. The different groups of peoples are divided. They're divided by this racial division between the Dorians, the sons of Hercules who returned to Greece, and the people who were there before, the ancient Greeks, the pre-Dorians. Okay? So there's two groups of people in Greece. And that's the source of the tension in Greece. Two races in Greece. The time of the Dorian invasion, when the Dorians come into Greece, there's a period of 300 years that's called the Greek Dark Age. So from 1100 BC, which is the end of the heroic age, the time of the Dorian invasion, until 800 BC, that period of time is called the Dark Age because there's not much available in terms of human records. There's no literature, there are no human records. It's a dark period for historians because there's nothing to study. There's no records. It's hard to know what's going on during that period. All right? But the Dorian invasion explains why it's dark. Right? There's lots of turmoil. There's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of trouble throughout Greece. The Dorians are moving back in, and there's not a lot of writing, not a lot of artwork, things like that. So the Greek Dark Age goes from around 1100 BC, which is the end of the heroic age, down to around 800 BC. And you can remember the end of the Dark Age because what ends the Dark Age is the rise and return of literature, like the writing of Homer. So in world chronology you learned that the writing of Homer ended the ancient world and started the classical world. That happens here at the end of the Greek Dark Age. Got that? Okay? So Homer and other writing developing around 800 BC marks the end of the Greek Dark Age. So a couple events to remember. The ancient world goes from 3500 BC until around the end of the heroic age, which is around the time of the Trojan War, around 1100 BC. We then have the Dorian invasion begin. We then have two races mixing in Greece in a time of trouble and Greek Dark Ages that take place from 1100 to 800 BC. That Dark Age continues until the rebirth of Greek culture, and we start to see literature like the writings of Homer. So that Dark Age ends and human records become available again, and we can begin studying and tracing the history in Greece after 800 BC. So you got that? Okay? Now this first chapter we're going to study, chapter 22 in the Cambridge History, is titled The Growth of the Dorian States. The Growth of the Dorian States. So the Dorian peoples have come in. They've taken some places in Greece. They've established their own states. And now, after 800 BC, those Dorian states start to develop. And that's why the chapter is titled The Growth of the Dorian States. We're going to study the period from around 800 BC or so, around the time when we have records and we can start talking about history again, from around 800 BC down to around 500 BC in this chapter. So make sure you just jot that down. This lesson basically covers the period in Greece from 800 BC to 500 BC. About 300 years. From the end of the Greek Dark Age to the rise of Spartan power around 550 BC. And the title of the chapter is a good summary, The Growth of the Dorian States. All right? The growth of the Dorian states. So you should know when the heroic age is, or when the heroic age ends, I should say. You should know when the Greek Dark Age is. And you should know that from 800 to 500 BC, the Dorian states grow in Greece. And you can see that at that point on the board here, these 4 points are sort of introduction to the lesson, and then we begin with the titles of the sections in our history text. So there are 8 sections in this chapter, in chapter 22. The titles of each of the sections are up here on the board, so you can see as I go through this, you can see where I'm getting the information from. You can read these sections and get all of this information, all right? So our lesson really begins here. Now, what I want to do before I go any further is I want to flip over, hopefully, let me just clean this up for a second. Hopefully I can get out of this and pull a map up on the screen. Yeah. All right, so on the screen here, on the video, you can't see this in the room, but I have a map of Greece. And I'd just like to explain a couple of things. Maybe I'll illustrate it simply on the board. Very simple to understand Greek geography. What we see up here is this neck of land in the north where Athens is located. That's this spot right here. So up in here, this little piece of land is called Attica, and Athens sits there in Attica. That's where Athens is located. We then have this thin neck of land, this isthmus, and the city of Corinth sits on the southern side of that isthmus. So here we have Corinth. I'm just going to write Cor here on the map. We have Corinth. Just south of Corinth, we have the great ancient city of Argos. So here is Argos. You really don't have to know this geography in detail. You can look it up on Google Maps or whatever, but if you just get an idea of where these places are located generally, you'll be able to understand the history. All right? So we have Argos, and I want you to think about Argos being in the east. Down in the south, we have Sparta. In the west, we have Olympia. And here in the middle, this land in the middle is called Arcadia. So for those watching the video, we have Corinth, then we have Argos, and Argos should be seen to control this eastern part of this island that I'll talk about in a minute. Down south, we see Sparta. To the east, over in this area, we have Olympia. And then in the middle here, this area is called Arcadia. All right, those are some of the important place names we need to know. Down in the southwest, this is the area known as Messenia. And the people up in the west, up here, are called the Eleans. And we'll talk about them later on. So just some basic geography. Now what's important is that this island, it's not really an island because it's connected by this Isthmus of Corinth. This island has a name. It's called the Peloponnesus. And this name is very important. This island at the southern end of Greece is called the Peloponnesus. And this word, Peloponnesus, means the island of Pelops. The island of Pelops. And so it's got an ancient history to it, an ancient mythology to it. But that entire body of land, that southern part of Greece, the entire island, as it were, is called the Peloponnesus. So Corinth is in the Peloponnesus. Argos is in the Peloponnesus. Sparta is in the Peloponnesus. Olympia is in the Peloponnesus. The center of the Peloponnesus is a mountainous land called Arcadia. To the west and the north, the people who live there are called Eleans. To the south and west, the people there are called Messinians. And that's how this land of the Peloponnesus is divided. These different places are mixed between Dorians and pre-Dorians. So you can see that there's a lot of fighting over who gets to control this land. There's a lot of fighting over who gets to control the Peloponnesus. And that's really the focus of this chapter. What's going on the Peloponnesus, because it's going to have very important effects on what happens in Greece in the future. So have a good idea of this geography, just a basic idea. Know what we're looking at here. We're looking at the land of Greece, Attica to the north and east where Athens is located. The Peloponnesus here, the island. Corinth sitting on the Peloponnesian side of the isthmus. Argos in the east, Sparta in the south, Olympia in the west, and Arcadia in the center. Those are the place names that we need to make sure we understand. All right, now we're going to walk through the sections of our text. So the first section in this chapter is titled Argos in the Dark Age. Argos in the Dark Age. Remember, Argos is the city on the eastern side of the Peloponnesus, the island, okay? Argos. Now, the name Argos should be familiar because in our study of the Trojan War, when we studied Homer's Iliad, the leader of the Greek armies was Agamemnon, and Agamemnon was the king of Argos. Okay, so in the Age of Heroes, before 1100 BC, in the Age of Heroes, Argos was a powerful city. One of the most powerful, maybe the most powerful city in Greece. Agamemnon was considered the greatest king in Greece in the Iliad at the time of the Trojan War. So Argos was powerful and famous during the heroic age, before the Dorian invasion. Argos was a great city. And Argos, after this period, always remained proud of their ancient history. They were the people of Agamemnon. And there are other Greek traditions that relate to Argos, like Jason and the Argonauts. The 12 labors of Hercules have a center in Argos. Okay? So there's a lot of history, a lot of pride for the people of Argos, and they're not interested in giving up their power to some invaders. So the people of Argos are ready to fight for their land. They're going to fight to control the Peloponnesus. So you have Argos there in the north and east of the Peloponnesus, and they represent old Greece before the Dorian invasion. You got that? You got to remember who's on which side as we get into this history. Argos is the city of Agamemnon, a great city of the heroic age. Argos was the city who led the Greeks against Troy in the Trojan War. They're not ready to give up their place as the biggest city, the greatest people in the Peloponnesus. They're in the northeast of the Peloponnesus. Secondly, Arcadia. Arcadia is the land in the center of the Peloponnesus. Mountainous land, land that's largely left alone. These cities are ringed around Arcadia, and Arcadia stands in the middle and is left alone. The Arcadians are non-Dorians. They are not Dorians. They're old Greeks. So far you see Argos. Argos has a connection to ancient Greece before the Dorian invasion. And Arcadia also has a connection to ancient Greece before the Dorian invasion. Okay? Argos wants to stay in power. Arcadia also wants to be left alone. Arcadia doesn't necessarily want to run things, but Arcadia has its own culture. Arcadia is its own people. They're an ancient culture. They've been there forever. They want to be left alone. That's Arcadia. And those are Dark Age cultures that when we come out of the Dark Ages, they're still as they were. They haven't changed. They were great before the Dark Age, and when the Dark Age comes to an end, they're still there. But there are new states. There are new places that appear after the Dark Age. Two great cities rise up after the Dark Ages. The first great city is Corinth, which sits on this isthmus that connects the Peloponnesus to the rest of Greece. Corinth. And down in the south, Sparta. Two great cities that rise as the Dark Age comes to an end. And they're complete opposites. They're complete opposites. Corinth sits right in the middle of the sea on the isthmus. Corinth is interested in trade. Corinth is interested in having relations with other nations, with other peoples. Corinth is very wealthy. Corinth wants to be wealthy. Corinth wants to be an international center. They want to have dealings with everyone. in the east and in the west. Corinth is open to new ideas. They're open to Eastern ideas. When you think about the East, this is the time out in the Bible lands where you've got the Ninevites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians are coming. So when you read about all these great kings in Assyria and Babylon and Persia, those kings are looking to do business with people in the East. Those kings are looking to trade. Corinth is eager to make those relations. Corinth is eager to mix with Eastern culture. Corinth is like the new age, the high tech, the new generation, the people of Corinth. Sparta is the opposite. Sparta loves its Greek land. The Spartans believed that they were the sons of Heracles. They're happy to be back home. They love their Greek land. Their wealth is their land. And they don't want to mix with other cultures. They don't care about trade. They don't care what the countries and the kings in the East do. Sparta has its own culture. They're happy to be Greeks down in the south of the Peloponnesus. They're the opposite of Corinth. You got that? Okay? Corinth and Sparta are two totally different cultures, and they are two cities that emerge, that rise after the Dark Age and are powerful. Corinth and Sparta. Now, all of these cities, Argos, the area of Arcadia, Corinth, and Sparta, are beginning to wrestle for control of the Peloponnesus. Who's going to control this land? Someone's got to control it. And these four different peoples begin to wrestle for the land of the Peloponnesus. Argos is in trouble because it's got enemies on both sides. It's got Sparta to the south, it's got Arcadia to the west, and it's got Corinth to the north. And Argos is starting to lose power. But around 700 BC, a king named Phaedon comes to power in Argos, and he's a great king, and he leads Argos back to some power. So King Phaedon leads Argos to power. Now, how do we know that King Phaedon makes Argos great again? The answer is in Olympia, which we'll look at in a little bit. Okay, but you should know that King Phaedon is a king of Argos who rises up around 700 BC and brings the people of Argos to power. Corinth is still developing. Arcadia is still hanging on. Sparta is developing. But King Phaedon brings Argos to power. He's a great leader. Around 700 BC, so 100 years after the Dark Age ends. In section number 5, we learn of another group of people. We see these names, Elis and Olympia. Now, the people up here, this area up here, north of the Peloponnesus is called Aetolia. Aetolia. You don't have to write that down. The people of Aetolia moved into the Peloponnesus and took control of this northwestern part of the Peloponnesus. So there's another group of people up here in the north on the west. They're called the Eleans. Okay? They take power up here in the northwest. And they do so around this time, around as the Dark Age comes to an end. They take place in an area that we call Elis, and they establish the great, we can call it a city, the city of Olympia. All right, they establish Olympia. What they establish there's a great mountain there, Mount Olympus, right? It's in the west of Greece. They establish two important things, these alien people. They establish the worship of the god Zeus. They become the center for the worship of the god Zeus. So just like Jerusalem was the center of the worship of the God of the Hebrews, Jerusalem was where he was worshipped, and all the Jews had to go to Jerusalem to worship God. Olympia was the place where men went, where Greeks went to worship Zeus. And so the Elean people, the Eleans, or Eleans, they were respected because they were the inventors, the developers of the sanctuary for Zeus at Olympus. So they were respected for the religious celebrations, the religious services that they developed at Mount Olympus in Olympia. They also invented the Olympic Games. They invented the Olympic Games. Both of these things were developed in the west, in the west of the Peloponnesus, around 776 BC. So when you think of the ancient Greek Olympics, when you think of Mount Olympus and the worship of Zeus in Olympia, the sanctuary for Zeus was developed, and the Olympic Games were developed in 776 BC. That's out there in the west of the Peloponnesus. All right? Now, the reason why historians know that King Phaedon was powerful and influential in Greece is because even though he's from the other side of the island, he was in charge of the Olympic Games one year. So even though he was from the other side of Greece, he was so important, King Phaedon, that he was actually in charge of the Olympic Games at one time. So he was an important dude. And King Phaedon, remember, was the king of Argos. So not only do we have Argos fighting for power, in the east, Arcadia in the center of the Peloponnesus, Corinth in the north, Sparta in the south. Now we have another group of people in the northwest. All right? And you see the dates were around 700, 750 BC, just getting out of this Dark Age. All this fighting going on. Now, up in the north at this time, you see the dates, 660 BC. In a city called Sicyon, which is in the north, and Corinth, a group of families, two families, take power, and they're called the tyrants because they control these cities. Sicyon is controlled by one family, and Corinth is controlled by another family. And these families, these tyrants, these dynasties that take power in the north, they're the people who are just eager to make Corinth and Sicyon, both of them are close together up in the north, they're eager to make them great cities. They're eager to trade. They're eager to do business with people of the east. They even imitate people of the east by this idea of acting like tyrants, by having power of the people controlled by dynasties, by individual families. They don't have much respect for religion. And the ideas of democracy develop in Sicyon and Corinth, mainly in Corinth. And the reason why democracy develops is because these Corinthians, all they care about is the success of their city. They'll do anything to become wealthy and powerful. And if the people can help them become wealthy and powerful, they'll do anything the people want. And so the idea of democracy starts to develop in Corinth. The family that's in control, the tyrants, they have all the control. But like the Persian rulers and the Babylonian rulers of the past, they understand that the best way to rule people is by being at peace with them. Right? Just leaving them alone. And so these ideas of democracy start to develop in Corinth, where the ruling family gives the people control, and basically does what they want. You can think about politicians in America and how they just do whatever the voters want, right? If the voters want, free bikes in all the cities, the politicians will start promising free bikes. The people's desires determine what the leaders do, and it's how the leaders come to power. That's the kind of culture that's in Corinth. You got that? You understand that? These years of the tyrants go on from 660 to 560 BC, and Corinth becomes a wealthy, powerful city at that time. Down in the south, Sparta is beginning to develop around 600 BC, and within 50 years or 100 years, Sparta will be the most powerful city in the world. All right, so we're going to see how that happens. Sparta becomes the most powerful people in the world in that century, the 6th century BC. So how do they do it? The first thing that the Spartans do, there's people down here in the southwest. They're called the Messinians. The Spartans conquer the Messinians. So the Spartans basically control the whole south of the Peloponnesus. You got that? The Spartans conquer the Messinians through war. That's the conquest of Messenia. The Spartan people control tons and tons of land. And basically, powerful men own large properties, large pieces of land, and they own enough land so that all of their needs are provided by that land. They own so much land that they can live off their own land. They have everything they need from their own land. And they have slaves, basically, called serfs. I don't know if I wrote helots on here. No. Serfs are basically slaves who work the land for the owners. The serfs earn their keep by working the land, and all of the goods of the land go to the owners of the land so that they can live. And because the owners of the land don't have to work, they can devote themselves to government and military. You understand that? They don't have to work. The serfs will work. And the nobles, the men who own the land, they're free to not have to work the land, but they can run the government and they can serve in the military. So the Spartans control the whole south of the Peloponnesus, and that's how they run it. You got that? Around 600 BC, Sparta creates a whole new government system and new laws. Around 600 BC. Make sure you get that date in your head. Around 600 BC, the Spartans create a whole new system of government and laws. This system of laws is called eunomia, which means good laws. All right? See that word, eunomia? It simply means the good laws. A whole new system of government and law is created in Sparta around 600 BC because Sparta wants to take power, and they know what they have to do to take power. In order for Sparta to take power, they have to become the most powerful military in the world. And so what they do is they design their government, they design their whole society for one purpose. The whole purpose of their society is to build and maintain the most powerful military in the world. And this is where the idea of famous Spartan soldiers comes from. The whole entire culture is devoted to its military. This system of government and laws is said to have been developed by a king named Lycurgus. The reason why I have his name in quotation marks is because no one really knows when he lived. It's not sure when this time was. But these changes appear to happen around 600 BC. And so this period of Lycurgan Reforms, the changes of Lycurgus, or the laws of Lycurgus, are said to happen around 600 BC, but no one really knows if there was a king named Lycurgus who actually changed these things, or whether he came later and the changes were already developing. But what happens in Sparta is the Spartan people completely devote their whole culture, their whole society, to building the strongest military in the world. The whole entire culture is devoted to military life. They basically live like soldiers in barracks. Literally. They live like an army 24 hours a day. And they devote their whole life, the whole society is devoted to the strength of its military. And these new laws design that culture. What you eat, where you sleep, how you marry and have relationships, every detail, how children are educated, everything is controlled by the state. Everything is controlled to produce the strongest possible military. Women are made to exercise. Spartan women are forced to exercise because the Spartan people see the women as the sources of future Spartan soldiers, and they want to raise the strongest women that they can, so they have the best babies. They raise the strongest children. The whole society is designed to build an army. All citizens are considered equal. There's no rich people, no poor people. The state owns everything, and everything is distributed and shared by the people. They're all just fellow soldiers. When children are 7 years old, their whole life is controlled by the state, and they're raised to be soldiers from age 7. The whole entire society is designed as a military state, and they become the most powerful military in the world. One of the most powerful military forces in all of world history. And we'll see them do famous things over the next 100 or 200 years. Sparta becomes a socialist state. And what a socialist state means is that the state basically owns everything and shares it among the people. So if you work, you can't, there's no business or working hard to become wealthy in Sparta. Everyone is equal. There are rules for how everyone lives, rules for how you live, where you live, what you eat, how you eat. There are rules for all these things. Who marries who? There are rules for all these things. Everything's determined by how it affects the military. It's a socialist state. And it's also a democratic state, like Corinth. Remember how I said democracy was starting to develop in Corinth? Sparta sets up a democracy to keep the people happy. But it's a fake democracy, and that's why I have it in quotes. Sparta has an appearance of being a democratic state, but it's not really a democratic state. The government is run by two groups. There's two bodies, two assemblies that run Sparta. One of the groups is called the Guerrantes. And I want you to see who makes up these groups. The Guerrantes are the two kings. Sparta has two kings, not one king. It has two kings. Sparta has two kings. The two kings are in this group. And the elders are basically old Spartan, Dorian noblemen who, with the two kings, make up this first group. They're the powerful old Spartans, old Dorians. That's group number one that governs Sparta. But then there's another group called the Apella, and it's made up of the citizens. So there's two groups that govern Sparta. One group is the two kings and the old, powerful Spartan families. And the other group is the citizens of Sparta. And remember, to be a citizen, you have to be a landowner who's able to be self-sufficient. That's what it means to be a citizen. You have to basically have your own farm and be able to produce everything you need so that you can devote yourself to the military. This body of citizens has 5 leaders called ephors. Okay? But you have two groups, the Guerrantes and the Apella, and they rule Sparta together. So it has a feel like it's a democracy because the body of the citizens gets to vote and they get to decide on things. The other group doesn't get to do whatever it wants. The citizens have a say. So it's democratic because the people do have some influence, but not really. Okay? Because this other group can just dismiss the citizen group. So this group only has power when the other group lets them have power. So it's democratic because the citizens do have power, but not really democratic because they don't control everything. But the whole government of Sparta is changed. The laws of Sparta are changed. And everything is focused on making Sparta a military power because Sparta knows that to control the Peloponnesus, they have to be the strongest. And there's only one way to become the strongest. It's to devote everything to the military. And so Sparta becomes a famous military power. The whole culture is devoted to the military. Now, what Sparta originally thinks is that it can just start beating everybody up. Remember I told you that Sparta conquered the Messinians, right? They conquered their neighbors in the west. And what Sparta thought was they could just keep doing that. They could go beat up the Arcadians, maybe eventually fight against Argos, and maybe even eventually beat up the Corinthians. And so at this time, Sparta chose to go to war with Arcadia, and they lost. Not because Arcadia was powerful, but just because it was too difficult to do anything to the people in Arcadia. And Sparta learned that even if they have a great military, they can't just go beating people up. It's just not going to work. So they changed their strategy. They said, you know what? We are going to build the most powerful military, but we're not going to fight against our neighbors. We're not going to fight against other Greek people. We're not going to fight against our neighbors. We're going to try to make a league. We're going to try to make an alliance with our neighbors, a Greek league. And so Sparta starts, you see this last section, the beginning of the league. Instead of beating up their neighbors and trying to take over the Peloponnesus by force, Sparta says, you know what? The Persians are getting very strong in the east. The Persians are rising in the east, and they look pretty dangerous. I think we better be careful that we don't spend all of our time fighting against other Greeks for control of the Peloponnesus when those Persians might come in here and run us all out. So the Spartans decide instead to try to make Greece a world power by uniting with the other Greeks. Sparta, with its powerful military, will be the leaders, but all of the other Greek peoples that it's been wrestling with for all these years, they're just going to become teammates. And Greece, united as a league, will become stronger than it could be if they fight against each other. So Sparta begins organizing a league of Greek people, Greek cities. Around 550 BC, Sparta unites the Peloponnesus and forms what's called the Peloponnesian League, the League of the Peloponnesus. And that league is one of the most powerful alliances of people in the world once they get organized. Now, the way that Sparta does this is Sparta says to the other people, what are we doing? Why are we fighting against each other? We're all Greeks. We all fought the Trojan War. We're all Greeks. Let's basically get Greece back together again. Right? That's what they do. They say, let's get back together again and we can rule the world. And so they find that by making deals with these other peoples, making alliances, making agreements, they can stop fighting with each other and maybe think about protecting themselves against outside forces like the Persians. So Arcadia joins Sparta. The Eleans join Sparta. The Messinians have no choice because they're already controlled by Sparta. Corinth joins Sparta, and they all are united together. The Peloponnesian League. The only one I'm not sure of, I'm not sure whether Argos joined the Peloponnesians or not. That's one thing I'm not certain about. I don't know if Argos joined with Sparta. But all the other peoples who had been fighting for all these hundreds of years and wrestling over the Peloponnesus, they decide instead to just join forces and form the Peloponnesian League. And so at the end of this period, in 550 BC, this league is the most powerful force in the world. And what's great about this is that guess what the Persians are planning? The Persians are planning to invade Greece. And so the Greek cities, the Greek people start organizing and strengthen themselves just before the Persians choose to invade Greece. And so we're going to go on to study the Persian Wars, when the great eastern kingdom of Persia chooses to travel and invade Greece. And who leads the Greeks against the Persians? Sparta. All right? So that takes us through the history, the growth of the Dorian States. The heroic age back around the time of the Trojan War, when Greece was united and fought together against the Trojans. Agamemnon was from Argos. Menelaos was from Sparta. Odysseus was from Ithaca. They all fought together against Troy. In the heroic age, Greece was united. The Dorian invasion brought the sons of Heracles back to the Peloponnesus. Two races were living side by side in Greece, fighting against each other, even though they were all Greeks. That led to a Greek Dark Age. The cities then, the peoples, then wrestled and fought with each other to try to control the Peloponnesus. That went on until Sparta reorganized its whole government and devoted itself to its military. The reforms of Lycurgus developed a military state. And then the Spartans led the cities of the Peloponnesus to get back together and reunite and form the greatest power in the world just before the invasion of the Persians. So that's the content, that's everything that's covered in chapter 22 of volume 3 of the Cambridge Ancient History. So we got through all that material. That's everything for the first lesson in classical history lesson 1. So what I'd like you to do, of course, is take a few minutes in your notes. Good. Take a few minutes and write a brief summary of what we covered. Make sure you've taken good notes, because listen, you're not going to read, I don't expect you to read the 50 or 60 pages in the textbook. You're either going to learn this history from this class, because I've given you enough information to be great for a high school history class. You need to learn the content of this lesson. You should make sure you have this outline and notes. Obviously, the video is recorded, so even you can watch the video on your own and take better notes or study from the video, right? But the content of this class is the content of the high school history for ancient history, for classical history. Okay? You're not going to read 50 plus pages of history text. You can try if you want, but I don't think you're going to do that. It's much easier to study these lessons. All right, so that's all for lesson 1 of classical history.